What if the only thing standing in the way of changing your life was having the confidence you need? I've found there's 3 areas you need to be confident in order to succeed: your mind, your faith, and your leadership. One or all 3 of these areas will always be in play. You are listening to Called to Confidence. I'm your host, Sharon Hughes, and confidence looks good on you. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Called to Confidence. Today's conversation is for anyone who has ever felt like they lost their footing, because Scott is going to share his story of what it was like to lose everything, walk into a cave, stay there for almost 2 years, and come out with clarity, purpose, and a life designed on intention. He is known as the 4th quarter coach, and if you are in a season of transition, you need him coaching your team.
Dale Carnegie of Orange County is proud to sponsor the Called to Confidence podcast. Dale Carnegie is a world-class training organization focused on leadership, communication, presentations, and sales. We help people take command of their lives through taking command of their work.
I'm so thrilled to have you on the show. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.
You are known as the 4th quarter coach, and not only can that go into business strategy, I think that is so fitting for just life strategy in general. Tell me, how did you come into this place of being the 4th quarter coach?
Well, it's a long story. It all really began. It sparked at a time when I thought it was the end, which actually was the beginning. But in the moment, it felt like the end. I had been a part of a family business. My brothers and my dad, we were all involved in a business, and we designed and built churches across America. And we had done that for about 44 years. But there was this little economic downturn in 2008 that a lot of people listening will probably remember in their own ways. For us, that was the beginning of the end, but we did not see it. What we saw was the subsequent 5 years of declining sales. Up until 2013, I had spent 24 years as the chief operating officer of our family business. And in 2013, after 5 years of a slide, the board asked me to assume the role of CEO to reinvent our family business. That was my single role. What are we going to do with this 40-some-year-old business that doesn't seem to be working? So I went to work and got to building a new way of doing things, and we were on our way. But that 5 years made us vulnerable to one project that had to start in June of 2015. Even though we had $20 million worth of backlog in various stages of design that we were working toward so that we can get into construction and get paid, we were vulnerable to one project. And rather than it starting in June of 2015, the pastor had been having an affair with the secretary, and that became public in June of 2015, leaving us with no other choice but to close. At that time was a 44-year-old business. That was my career. I had no idea who I was. I lost my identity, lost my nearly 30-year career, lost all our income because my wife and I both worked in the business. And that then ushered me into I call it an 18 to 25 month dark season of life of soul searching. I really didn't know who I was, because over the years and decades, I had attached my identity to what I did. And when what I did was gone, so was me. And I wrestled with that quite a while before I began. And I'm a believer. I was raised in a Christian home in the Midwest. And as I became an adult, I made that my own belief system. And so I did a lot of praying, a lot of soul searching, and I feel like wisdom was given to me about these ingredients that I'd had, the experiences, this great loss. And what I was missing was a recipe. And
Mm.
I search, what is this recipe? What could I use about my story going forward? And this fast forward now, I hired a branding coach. We
Mm-hmm.
worked for about 4 months together. And when I lost my career, I was 50 years old. That's significant because um, I have a special place in my heart for people who are in their 50s, who
Mm-hmm.
have a disruption of some sort. Um, because it's a unique stage of life. And so what I began to do was I looked at the average lifespan of about 78 years or so, rounded it up to 80, broke life into four 20-year segments. And so that led to quarters, four quarters, just like in a football game, there are four quarters. Um, Years ago, when I was in my mid to late 40s, I read a book called Halftime by Bob Buford,
Mm-hmm.
and a very similar kind of idea. We go through the first half with a search for success. We go into our second half of life with a search for significance. And so I cut my teeth in that kind of thinking, didn't know I'd be using it to this extent, but I broke it into four quarters. So the third quarter, our 40s and 50s, usher us into the fourth quarter, which is our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And that's where I began to say, look, I was living life by default when I lost my career. And what I mean by living by default, I had no life strategy in mind. I was just taking life as it happened
I think
by default.
everybody does, right? I mean, the majority of us do. That we were taught that. We were,
Mm-hmm.
taught get an education, get married, have kids, work the same job,
Mm-hmm.
retire, and then watch football.
It's
Well,
a
you probably watch football all the way through, but when
Yeah,
you retire, you really watch football.
yeah. Watch football. Leisure time. Travel, golf,
Right.
go do a garden, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that was the scenario, and it was pretty much a pseudo strategy. There really wasn't any formal thinking about how can I live my life in such a way that I transcend the ups and downs of life. When I work with
Mhm.
clients, what we talk about is there are three things you can count on. You can count on death, you can count on taxes, and you can count on the ups and downs of life. Doesn't matter if you're strategic or not. There are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days. And
Mhm.
for some of us, those bad days are really bad. Some of them aren't so bad. Some of them are long periods of bad. Some of them are very good days and long stretches of wonderful life, but they're ups and downs.
Yes.
Living
Yes.
by default is just riding the wave, enjoying the good days, somehow figuring out how to get through the bad days until the good days come back. And then, you go through. I was living that way. And then we had this major disruption.
Hmm.
And because I was living by default, it took me longer and I went deeper into the cave than necessary.
Ooh, ooh.
So
Talk about
coming
that.
out of it,
How
talk
do
about,
we unpack that? Because I think there's a lot of us that are in the cave.
oh, yeah. So the cave, that wilderness experience, or that dark season, the best way I can describe it is a lack of agency.
Mm.
You do not have agency. In other words, you feel like you're being controlled by circumstances, and you
Mm.
feel like you're being controlled by other people's decisions. I was controlled by a pastor's decision to have an affair with a secretary. That became my narrative.
Hmm.
I was I lost my career because someone else chose to go a path, and that affected me. What I didn't see was all the choices I made that made me vulnerable to that person's decision. But a lack of agency, it's a horrible way to live. It's the
Yeah.
existence of life when you feel like you're being controlled is no fun way of living. Uh,
So how does somebody stop? So they'll hear this conversation and they'll say, okay, I think I'm living by default. how do I shore things up so that I am not vulnerable to Joe's decision down the street? Because I
Mm-hmm.
call what you're describing, this this very sad incident, this poor choice that somebody made. It's the ripple effect, right? Somebody makes a decision that he thinks is just affecting his life and the secretary's life, but it affected your business and your family and probably countless others. So
Right.
how do we identify what is happening in our life so that we're not vulnerable like that? Yeah, you
It's
mentioned that you had to realize that you were making decisions along the way. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right. And making decisions through the lens of a life by default.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, my answer immediately, my mind went to there's another constant in life. And I suppose it's the fourth thing that we can count on, that everything we face has context.
Mm-hmm.
There's always context to every single thing we face. So let me share with you what I mean by that. There's if you step back far enough, and there were days in this cave where I had to step back as far as, okay, God has no beginning, God has no end. That was the I can't go any further than that. There's something bigger than me, right? I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to step back. What happens when you step back from whatever you're facing? You begin to see options. Options begin to appear when you step back from what you're facing. Options then lead to choice. And that's how I define agency. Options plus choice equals agency. Now, that does not mean that you're going to like all the choices or all the options. They may
That's a good
be
point.
the lesser of two evils, right? But the point is, you have choice. When you don't have agency, you feel like you have no choice. And
Mm,
whatever you're facing is the sum total of your existence. Almost like if I
okay.
were to hold a penny to my eye and I
Mm-hmm.
were to look at that penny, all I can see is that penny.
Mm-hmm.
But if I pull that penny away, I begin to see the room. I begin to see the
Right.
sky. And I think, okay, my life is not defined by that penny. Where it was before, it is not now.
That's
So
good.
whatever your listeners are facing right now that seems insurmountable and is stealing their agency,
Mm,
the first step is to step back and continue to step back until you see options. And okay, so practically, what does it mean to step back?
yeah.
Well, I encourage anybody I talk to about when they're facing a lack of agency and we're talking about stepping back, I would encourage a pen and paper. A pen and paper therapy is a fantastic way to get back into agency. There's it's a therapeutic mechanism where you're using visual because you're literally looking down on a sheet of paper and you're using your hand. So there's touch, there's feel, there's visual, and you're using creativity. So you're using both sides of the brain in order to get out whatever it is you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people type. That's the lesser of a good download. The best download is flat out just pen and paper. And you list everything that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And those of you listening who are not journal oriented, they think, oh, it's kind of like keeping a diary, and I don't like to do diaries. Well, there are dozens of ways of journaling. One of
Mm-hmm.
the most effective ways for a non journaler to download everything that's in their mind is bullet. Just make a bullet list of every thought. So you're
That's
making a
good.
list. Just get every thought. And this is a no grammar, no punctuation, no concern for it being perfect coming out of your pen. You're just literally writing everything down. And give yourself permission to burn it later, so you don't have to worry that it's going to get caught, and you're
Oh, I
these
like
deep
that. Yeah.
they are yours, right? So um, a variation of this is sometimes you're facing a very difficult person and they've
Mm-hmm.
done something to you. Um, a variation of this download would be to write an email but never send it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea of downloading. When you download whatever's in your mind, because that's where all the agency takes place. So when I faced a loss of career, I was instantly in my head. I was trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
Had I downloaded and got it out, here's the funny thing is, when we talk about agency, look at the adjectives that we use when we're not feeling well. We talk about feeling under the weather.
Okay.
And when we're feeling great, we feel like we're on top of the world,
Mm,
under and on top, right?
right.
So
Mm-hmm.
that is a beautiful metaphor for the download. What you're facing, whatever is taking your agency, you are facing that, you're under it. And a download moves you back to a place of perspective. If we were to
Mm,
carry the football metaphor, you're going from the field to the offensive coordinator's booth. You're stepping up away from it. And it's funny because you carry that metaphor all the way out. When you write something down on paper, you are literally looking down on it. So you're on top of it. You're on top looking down. And if you wrote out everything else, everything that was in your mind on a sheet of paper, and you can't possibly think of another thing that's going through your mind,
mm-hmm.
you put the pen down, you step back, you look at that piece of paper, and you say, it all fit on one piece of paper. Maybe it fit on two pieces, but it's not like you're going to write and write and write and you're going to be writing on the walls and you're going to be writing forever. Normally, when we're facing a lack of agency, everything looks bigger or feels bigger than it actually is. And when you can download, it puts the size in perspective.
That's really good. That's really good because I think when all these things are in our head, we don't have that size perspective. It seems insurmountable and it swirls around in our head, overwhelms us. So I love what you're saying about getting it out onto paper. It also frees up some mental real estate as well. So
Mm-hmm.
you can think a little more clearly, get that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I was working with a client once who was really struggling with that. Their family had two businesses, and his dad ran one business and he ran the other business, and his dad wanted him to take over the other business, and his heart was not in that business, and so the only alternative was to sell it. And he was really struggling with this whole thing. What do I do with my dad's legacy and all this sort of thing? And we began to do that download.
Yeah.
And best way to describe it was he had this big circle, and just inside that circle was another big circle. And he
Mm,
said, that's how I saw my dad's business, the legacy and all that, because I was struggling with letting it go because I didn't know what that would do to my dad's legacy and all. But when
mm,
we began to look at it, it began to become a smaller circle. The big circle was still there, but that whole scenario with his dad's business was a smaller circle. And he began to see that as part of his life, not the
mm-hmm,
definition of his life. It was
mm,
an aspect of it. So that gave him margin. It gave him space, mind space. It gave him um, the necessary opening to think creatively.
mm.
And so that, I
Good.
talk about 5 Ds when we were talking about the first D, download, get it
Yeah.
out first.
Okay.
Then,
So number
then
one,
you
get it out first. Okay.
get it out first.
Got
Once
it.
you get it out, then you discern. And what I mean
Mm,
by discern is you look at what you've downloaded and you begin to group them by affinity. What are all the thoughts that have to do with this aspect? And what are all the thoughts that have to do with this thing? So you're discerning what you've downloaded. Once you've discerned it, then you move into the third phase, which is design a path forward. What are you going to do about this. Now you have given yourself some space, and you've identified the fact that whatever you're facing isn't what defines you. It is a part of you. Now you have the strength to design, what are you going to do about it? And sometimes it's do nothing. Just download was the thing, but you're designing a path forward. The fourth step is you do. You do that, what you've designed. And then after a period of time of doing, you dig. You step back and you say, what have I learned about this whole thing now that I've taken these steps? And you iterate. And so it's a cycle. You go back to download, you download again, and you discern what you've downloaded, and then you design a path forward. You do that path, then you dig, and then and that began. I started thinking about those 5 steps, and that's what led to a strategic planning life by design, which
Wow.
is the opposite of life by default.
Hmm.
So if you're living a life by design, these ups and downs are still going to be there, right? But you are now operating at a higher plane. You're building something bigger. So I always tell my clients, imagine at the bottom of the sheet is a sine wave that represents the ups and downs of life. But above that, put the Dow Jones Industrial Graph since 1900 to 2024. And it's a jagged ups and
Hmm.
downs, but a general trend upward, right? That describes your strategy. That's your personal strategic plan that transcends the ups and downs. And
That's a
then,
really good analogy. I really appreciate that one because we get
yeah,
in our head, right? Don't we get stuck and just think we're going to stay where in this weird, messy place?
mm-hmm. That's the problem. It's a weird, messy place, and we have no way of getting out. What
Hmm.
I'm saying, I had no way of getting out, but through the grace of God, I was able to see what was going on and develop a system to help other people. It's almost like um, I've been there. I found the keys out, and now I'm showing people where the keys are. And
Mm,
that's a fantastic way of life for me. It's an opportunity for me to redeem the loss.
that's
Uh,
really good. That's really good. You've said a couple things that I want to highlight. But first, before I ask one of the questions that I know is going to be burning with everybody, I, close the loop on what happened next. So you went through these steps, the 5 Ds. You've lost everything. You've lost your family legacy, so to speak, this business. Then what happened? How did you come out of that? I think you said it was 18 to 24 months of just this dark, frustrating place. What was next?
well, I'd love to tell you that I saw the light and burst out with a great business plan and I'm wildly successful and all that. Unfortunately, I can't say that. What I did was I began to get some insight,
Mm,
wisdom about what was really going on. I began to look at the ingredients. I had been exposed to coaching in 1995 or 1999. We were thinking about doing that as a benefit to our employees at the time. We had 70 employees. And I was charged with the responsibility to look into this thing called life coaching, which was relatively new. I fell in love with the dynamic of coaching. So I hired my own coach, became certified as a coach, and did coaching on the side for years, right? So I had coaching. I had 24 years COO and had 2.5 years as CEO in a very stressful time. Uh, so those were the ingredients. And I began to get wisdom how I could leverage that and use that to help other people, right? But I was still operating by default.
mm,
I had the insight, but I was still living by default. So what that translated to was I started fits and starts. I would get ahead of the spirit. I would do things that I thought were good ideas and they wouldn't pan out. And then I would get depressed. And then I would start something new, another thing, and then I would get depressed. And I would characterize it. I was at this desk, this very desk that I'm speaking. This is my son's old bedroom.
mm,
And I've turned it in my office. On the left side of my desk was my computer, and I was working on my website and all that. On my right side of the desk was my phone, and I had the Indeed app. And
Mm,
so I straddled the fence. Do I work for somebody or do I go into business for myself? So I called it the W-2 1099 balance, and I was on the fence. And
wow.
5 years after that incident in June of 2015, this would have been 2020. My wife came to me, who had landed a job that paid for our health insurance and all that, but it wasn't exactly the kind of job that would be very. The culture was difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and she came to me in August of 2020, and she said, or two, so 2015, there have been 2000, year 2000. No, that would have been 2020. Sorry, I'm losing my time frame. She said, "Do you know it's my 5th year anniversary?" And I
Wow.
could not believe that it had 5 years had gone by, and I'm doing these fits and starts.
Yeah.
Couldn't really decide what I was going to do. That was a wake up call. I
Mm-hmm.
call hitting. So I describe it as a bunch of ups and downs, and I hit the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very serious. That's when I got the branding coach and decided put the Indeed app away, zero in on building your own business, and define who is it that you are specifically called and
Mm.
primarily called to help. And that began, I started my branding coach and we started talking about Gen X or baby boomers or millennials. That was the stage that led me to the four quarters.
Wow.
And so it wasn't, it wasn't, I hit the ground and then I came out of the cave strong. I came out of the cave weak and still without agency, still living by default. But over time, when I hit the wall, that's when I got really serious about, okay, what does it really mean to live by design?
Yeah.
Let's get serious about this. And so looking back on that, I know I wouldn't have sunk as low and it wouldn't have taken me as long because we're still going to struggle with ups and downs.
Sure.
That having a strategy and living by design does not take away the difficulty of those down times, but it does give us a chance to say, this does not define me. It is a
Mm-hmm.
part of your picture and a bigger plan that I'm working on.
That's really good. Wow. What a story. So what I'm thinking about is you talked about your identity being attached to your work. I think that that
Mm-hmm.
is so prevalent everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we not make our identity s- married to our work? Just how do
Mm-hmm.
we stop that and have a healthy separation so that we're doing good work, but when those lows come, we don't completely fall apart? Boy, that's, even as I'm trying to say it, I'm trying to get my mind around it because this is obviously a problem for everybody. I think it's more so for men
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because men are typically the breadwinners, typically. And there's
Mm-hmm.
so much pressure
Mm-hmm. Right.
on men. I spoke to somebody the other day where we were talking about identity as well and that pressure and the burnout because men are
Mm-hmm.
really told, suck it up, be a man and get it done.
Right.
So what advice do you have for men that are behind you in this journey? They're like, layoffs are coming.
Yeah. Um, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. It is the single greatest struggle I had. There were
Mm,
lots of other things that I struggled with, but if you were to ask me what's the biggest thing you struggled with, by far, head and shoulders above everything was my identity. I really didn't know who I was because no longer did I have CEO or COO beside my name. If I
mm,
walked into a room and someone said, "What do you do for a living?" I didn't have an answer.
wow.
The only thing I had was, well, I used to be. fill in the blank. So identity is a huge thing. It is. And it crosses genders. Every one of us find or we look for our identity. Best way to describe it or to get our minds around this identity thing is I always say there's no such thing as moonshine. We've heard of moonshine. In the hollers of Kentucky, you'll find people making moonshine, right?
Mm-hmm.
But technically, there is no such thing as moonshine because what moonshine what it means is that the moon has to have its own source of light in order for it to shine. Moon does not shine. The moon has never shone. The moon reflects another source of light. So there are two separate planets at play. When we see a full moon, we are not seeing moonshine. What we are seeing is a reflection of the sun because the moon has positioned itself every 30 days to a place where we can see most of it. Right? Now, what does that mean? What does that have to do with identity and vocation and all that sort of thing? Well, again, I believe that we were created by design, on design, right? And the way I've chosen to believe is God created me in his image, all right? So that has to do, that's the sun, all right? So let's say that's the sun. And what does that mean? Okay, well, you've got certain core values. When you see somebody and you really admire them, whatever it is that you admire in that person, that's a good reflection of a core value that you hold. So core values, personality, the things that you do that fuel your energy, the things that you do that sap your energy. These are all what I call the foundational parts of our identity. When I work with clients who either lose their career or they exit their business, it's a matter of, okay, let's rediscover the identity that has always and will always be there. Okay. The moon is equal to the job or the vocation. So your job is an expression of who you are. It is not who you are. It is an expression. It's what people experience about who you are. Who you are is who you are. It's what you were designed to be. And by the way, that is very unique. There's no one like you. There never will be anyone like you. So it's a very precious identity. But we have cheapened it by saying, okay, the sun is now the moon. And so, people ask you, what do you do? Well, I'm a CEO of a multi-million-dollar family business that designs churches across America. Wow, that's cool. Right? And that we hear that, we get that affirmation over time, and we begin to think, okay, that's who I am. That's the sum total of who I am. Some people will say when you lose your career, you got to create another identity. And I would say, no, you don't. You need to rediscover the identity that is there. All right. I've got 3 grandkids and 1 on the way as of the recording of this. My identity is who I am.
Right.
When I'm down on the floor playing with my grandkids, that's an expression of my identity, and that's their experience of who I am. That's the moon that doesn't shine. The moon is reflecting. That's the expression. When I talk with building a design, one of the 6 strategic initiatives or 6 hallmarks is what I call being vocationally aligned. I don't define vocation as a W-2 or 1099. A vocation is what you give your time, energy, and attention to. Right. Therefore, if you lose your job or you exit your career or you exit your business that you own, what you're doing is now finding the alignment of your vocation or the alignment of your time, energy, and attention. And keeping in mind that the career, it doesn't matter if it's a 10-year career, a 30, 50, 60-year career. It is an expression of who you are. That, when I share that with clients, it's such a freeing concept because now they're no longer dealing with the lack of agency. They're
Wow.
now, their agency is intact. We're discovering who they really are, that they've always been. And now we're finding ways to express differently that same identity.
Yeah.
And so there is that 30-year career, my identity. It was a 30-year expression of who I am.
That's really good. Did you struggle with being angry and then being a man of faith? You knew that you needed to forgive. How
Mm-hmm.
hard was that?
It was very hard. Anger was one of the emotions,
Mm,
right? And I fought it until I embraced it.
mm,
I fought it because I thought you shouldn't be angry, but you are, which led to guilt for being
yeah.
angry. And I fought it. I resisted it. And when I embraced it and said, I'm angry, that took the venom away from the emotion. And that's a mini download, a very significant but mini download. When you go from resisting an emotion to embracing an emotion, you have given yourself the opportunity to have agency, because
Mm,
now no longer are you controlled by the emotion. You
right.
are now in control, or you have a sense of agency over that anger, and you begin to work with it. Now, does that mean once I embraced it, I was over? No. It's, sometimes depending on what happens to us, forgiveness becomes a part of who we are, and we have to forgive and forgive and forgive and give it up over and over again till it becomes just a
Hmm.
part of us, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, for us to resist emotion is
Hmm.
for us to resist our identity. We were made with emotions.
Right.
So if we acknowledge the emotions and embrace them and simply sit with them and say, I'm angry, or I'm confused, I'm frustrated, then over time that begins to take the venom away from the
Right.
actual emotion. And by the
Wow.
way, anger has a very constructive, productive element to it. It actually can be the thumb in our back to do what we know we need to do, strategic,
Mm, that's
right?
good.
Rather than it being a headwind, we turn it into a tailwind, and it becomes the fuel that we can literally use. And that's the connection between the sine wave at the bottom and the
Hmm.
Dow Jones Industrial Graph at the top. There's a connection, because now no longer are you able to process ups and downs, but you can leverage them to further your strategic plan. So, what can I
Mm,
learn about this
hmm.
downturn that I'm facing? What can I learn about it? What is that doing to me? And I talk about 6 hallmarks: spiritually, physically, relationally, emotionally, vocationally, and financially.
Hmm.
So you have a construct now. You have context
Hmm.
in which to process what you're going through, good and bad.
Wow, you are a wealth of information. And one of the things that I love though is because there's a lot of people out there that coach and I coach, but they seem to be popping up everywhere. And you're an authentic coach because you are teaching what you personally walked through. You're not teaching theory from a book or some pie in the sky idea of reinventing yourself. And I think that when we look for mentors and leaders and coaches, it's a gift. It's a gift to share with the world what you have overcome and walked through so that the next person can see what's really possible for them. It's like, what was it? I know you know this story when nobody thought that somebody could run the 4 minute mile until somebody did, you know, and they set the stage. So now we know that can be done.
Right.
That's so good. What's next for you, Scott? I know you probably have all kinds of things cooking. I think you're that kind of guy.
Well, and I trip over that on occasion. Currently, I am in a space that I believe doors have opened, and I'm able to work with business owners and the advisors of business owners
Mm,
to work on the emotional human side or dimension of exit planning.
mm,
Business owners, when they get to a certain age or they get to a certain mindset, they want to sell their business, right? And that's actually going to be a major, like multi trillion-dollar transfer of business wealth from one owner to the next owner over the next 10 years. And what I've found and discuss and believe that there's a lot of people who will help get the business ready so that it can derive the biggest multiple in the sale. But very few, if any, people are working on getting the owner ready. And I
mm,
believe that the path that I've been on since 2015 has uniquely positioned me to help people, either business owners exiting their business or an executive who has spent a lifetime in a career who doesn't know what they're going to do once they quote unquote retire. Um, and that's what I'm pursuing is people over 45 who are facing some sort of transition in their life, and it is taking away their agency. And when
mm.
we work together, we develop a mechanism for them not only to regain their agency, but to consistently live with agency.
Okay, I want to know when your book is coming out.
I've actually got a little booklet. It's more of a workbooklet that I call Life by Design, and it's on Amazon. It's only about 65 pages, but it walks you through the foundations to create your identity and then the 6 hallmarks that I referred to briefly here.
I love it. I will definitely have that linked up in the show notes. Scott Couchenour of Serving Strong, you are an absolute joy and a wealth of information. Thank you for the work that you are gifting the world.
Well, I appreciate you and I appreciate the questions you've asked. These are real human questions, and I appreciate that.
And you are welcome back anytime.